Good morning, everybody. Today I will talk about drones and their possible attack vectors, and hopefully it will be a nice fly. So, before I start, I want to thank you all the people, especially some of my friends that helped me with this research, and especially one guy that followed me in various field trips in order to test all the attack vectors that I will show you later. The guy preferred to be anonymous, so I will thank him with an empty slide, but he knows. So let me introduce myself for a moment. I'm Paolo Stagno, and I'm better known on internet as a VoidSec. And since the beginning of my career, I've mainly dealt with penetration test and red team, while now that I'm DoyenSec, I'm moving towards the research of new vulnerabilities and application security. So here you can find some details if you want to reach me or if you would like to ask me further questions. So I'm sorry, I know that some of you were hoping about this, but I will not speak about it. While I mainly divided my research into three main blocks, the first one, where I will speak about vulnerability research and the main attack vectors. After that, we will have a bit of reverse engineering, speaking about the SDK. And the last part, that is drone forensics. So since the first introduction in the consumer market, we've seen drones used by different sectors. For example, the law enforcement, where drones were used for border control or patrolling. After that, another project that is a beautiful project where drones were used as portable defibrillators. And also, the drones were also used in to check some places that are not easily reachable by a man. So you can think about large infrastructure, bridges, and stuff. And unfortunately, in 2017, some modified version of drone were also used in Syria and Iraq to drop projectile explosive on the battleground. And obviously, drones were also used by all the creative mind for aerial photos and videos. And personally, I've used drone during red team engagement in order to map physical access for big plants or drones equipped with a pineapple in order to map a Wi-Fi hotspot around the place. And in this panorama, a Chinese company called DJI quickly gained the fame and reputation as the most stable area platform for video filming and shooting. And that's what you see in the slide is the DJI Phantom 3. And on this product, I based all my research and this talk. So, as you can see from the slide, there is the main body of the drone and its ground controller and some various equipment. As I said before, these are some of the key points of this version. So the drone weighs 1.2 kilograms. It's 800 grams for the drone, 400 grams for the battery. And the drone is also easy to fly with another 400 grams of payload, so you can modify it with, for example, adding a pineapple or other stuff. And usually it has 20-25 minutes of autonomy. It's really depending on the weather condition, especially for the wind. And its maximum speed is 16 meters per second or 57 kilometers per hour. And yeah, I was mentioning it earlier. It is an excellent platform for the stability of its shoots. Okay, I'm joking. This is the video feedback of a race drone. While, yeah, this is the real video footage of a drone. I was flying near the sea, so there is a little of wind, but as you can see, the video is still very stable. Okay, and these are some photos in different weather condition, wind condition, and light condition. The left corner and the right corner are from my hometown in Turin. Italy. So I'm just proud of it. Okay, now I will introduce you the drone architecture in its components. So the drone, the main aircraft, has a lot of technological components like the flight controller, the radio modules, some other GPS module or sensor like compass and gyroscope. And also there is another part that is the ground controller. This is basically only a radio module for communicating commands to the drone. And the last block is the application that is optional that you can use on mobile phone. And it has some kind of flight-assisted navigation for example, drone takeoff, return to home, and waypoint, path, fly. And that's pretty much the architecture of this model. So the first things that I did was trying to understand its network schema. Basically, the ground controller is acting as a access point, a Wi-Fi access point for the drone and the camera. And drone and camera are two different systems. So they probably separate the drone from the camera in order to don't have the video feedback interfere with the flight controller. And as I said before, there is the optional usage of a mobile phone where you can retrieve the video feedback on screen so you can see what the drone is seeing. And this is the list of the exposed services within the network that I showed you before. So basically, I'm having a flying FTP server, and all the interesting services like SSH and Telnet are filtered out. So FTP is always reachable because you have to download the media files from the drone. And the port 5678, it's also used by the mobile application, the Android iOS mobile application. While this is the last version of the firmware, and this is the Nmap scan of the network. So they filtered out a lot of unnecessary services, and they only left the core one. And specifically, they left the FTP, because it's also used for uploading the new firmware on the drone and retrieve the flight logs, and the port used by the application. And this hardening was due to contrast an illegal mod market that basically allow people to change, for example, the maximum altitude of the drone, or remove some limitation like the no-fly zone. And regarding the communication between the aircraft and the controller, there is a Wi-Fi connection that is established by the ground controller to the drone, and it will transport flight data and video stream to the phone. So the drone, this model, will not use the light bridge protocol, that is a proprietary DJI protocol for long distance stream, and it has some kind of greater stability for long ranges, and it also allows full HD streaming and some master and slave system. And the light bridge protocol is used on more expensive and professional drone of DJI. While on this one, the standard is, of the Wi-Fi is the WPA2, and the default SSID is derived from the MAC address from the remote controller, and is following the following format. So it's Phantom3 underscore, the last 6 digits of the MAC address. And the default password is the evergreen strong password, 1234, 1234. So if you don't change it, anyone can connect to your network and exploit some other functionality of the drone. And obviously, drones are not exempt from most classic Wi-Fi attacks. So we have some predefined behavior in the case of the authentication attack. And the authentication attack will force the disconnection of the phone or controller from the drone. So in the event of a phone that is disconnected from the ground controller, nothing happened. The ground controller still holds the priority, and it will be able to continue to drive the drone. While if we make the authentication attack to disconnect the controller from the drone, well, that will trigger the automatic return to home functionality. So return to home consists in bringing the drone to a predetermined altitude, that is default 30 meters from the ground, and after that the drone will fly straight line on the last GPS point that was set as a home point. So this functionality cannot be used without the GPS. And what happens if we try to add a new device into the existing network? Well, the aircraft maintain a queue of devices, and the queue leaves the priority to the first connected phone. So if we disconnect the first connected phone, the second one can now connect and use the functionality of the application. And if we try to use mobile phone and ground controller at the same time, the ground controller still has the priority, but using all of them at the same time will make all the system a lot less manageable. So it will be hard to fly if you are poking around with a mobile phone. And again, Wi-Fi attacks, the common one. The network settings cannot be downgraded to WAP, and there is no support for the WPS. While the WPA 2 is vulnerable to the standard four-way handshake attack, so we can recover the pre-shared key. And also, we will see it later, but since the drone system is based on OpenWRT, and DJI never released a patch after the crack advisory, it is also vulnerable to crack. And this is one of the examples. So I was using Fluxion and a good dictionary, and it was just a matter of some time to recover the pre-shared key that you can see. Okay, so basically, my goal was to obtain at least a shell, possibly a root shell, on the main aircraft. And at this point, I had some good services like SSH and Telnet, but they were filtered. So, and also, I don't have the credential for these services. And so the first things that come to my mind was to trying to explore the application that DJI provide for the video feedback as some other assisted control. So here a small digression. In Phantom 3 model and later, DJI provides a geofencing system or an inbuilt no-fly zone list. And the no-fly zone are, as shown by the image, some virtual fences with specific diameter, which the drone cannot fly in. So this makes possible to exclude some location, like the airports or military bases, from drone flight. Specifically, DJI makes also able to pilot a map where you can see country by country the list of no-fly zone in this area. And there are three different types, actually 4 different types of no-fly zone. But I will only mention 3 of them because the 4th is basically just a variation of one of them. So there is the warning zone, that are zone in green, and where user will be just prompted with a warning message. And so, for example, protected wildlife area will have the green marker, but you will just get a warning message and you will be able to fly. After that, we will have a yellow zone or authorization zone. Authorization zone will require a verified DJI pilot account and internet connection in order to unlock this area. So you need to have the account on DJI and also internet connection. You will be able to unlock the area and will be able to fly. And the last one is the red one, the restricted zone, and our zone where the drone cannot fly in. So if you try to fly the drone inside a no-fly zone, that is the restricted one, you won't be able to fly. But the main problem is that no-fly zone is using GPS. So if you don't have GPS coverage, the no-fly zone list is useless. And also, the drone cannot be tricked, while if you have GPS fix and try to put the drone into the attitude mode, that basically will exclude GPS system, but the drone still has the fix, it will refuse to fly inside the no-fly zone. And this is basically one of the systems that DJI is using to update no-fly zone that are inbuilt in the firmware. So while they are upgrading your DJI application on mobile phone, they are also pushing some new updates for no-fly zone, and this is one of the examples. So as you can see from the slide, in blue, you can see the information about the position and the radius of the no-fly zone, while in red, you can see the type of no-fly zone. In this case, it's a stadium, so the flight is not permitted, and we can see the level. Different level mean different kind of no-fly zone. While in violet, you can see the expiration time, or when a no-fly zone was first introduced into the no-fly zone list. And lastly, in green, you can see the name of the no-fly zone. As I said before, is a stadium, the Juventus Stadium in my city, so the flight is not permitted. And the main problem with these updates is that the application resources are not signed. So you can just edit the resources, you can just edit this JSON file, and you can invalidate the introduction of this new no-fly zone list. And continuing diving inside the application, I was also able to find this configuration file that is holding the password for the aircraft. And you know, the password is Big China, is a Chinese product. And they are also trying to improve because in previous models, they were using only digits. So they are slowly trying to improve. So perfect. Now I have the root password. Yeah, the problem is that the services are still filtered, and FTP service is basically chi-rooted, so I cannot traverse the file system. So I was trying to think to other attacks that I can bring against the drone. So I tried some firmware replacement, but there is some kind of checksum that prevent me to replace the firmware. And since I'm lazy and doing the firmware analysis would require a lot of time, I prefer to search for some simple keywords and grep for them. And I was able to extract some hashes of the users, which I cracked. So now I'm full of password and username, but I'm still not able to use in this combination because the services are filtered. So again, I also thought that some of the countermeasure can be introduced in later updates. So even if it's not documented, I found out that if you press these 3 small lines in the application, basically a new menu will pop out and you can downgrade the firmware. So I downgraded the firmware from the last version to a present one. And when I downgraded the firmware, I was able to traverse the file system using the FTP. So the FTP was not chi-rooted anymore, and I basically downloaded the entire file system and start its analysis. And from the file system, I recovered the fact that DJI is using a fork of OpenWRT, the version 14.07, and it's called the Barrier Breaker, and it's full also of custom DJI binary. So I also found these scripts, and these scripts are running at boot time, and they are holding some information about the network connection and network settings. So adding the following command, the telnet -l, bin hash, and so on, I was able to reactivate the telnet service, and I was able to connect. So I was finally root and that was great, but I didn't finish yet, because basically I left out one of the third element of the DJI package. So until now, I didn't have considered the SDK as an attack vector. And the sad story is that the first time that I tried to compile the SDK, I received back something like 11,000 error messages. But at the end, with some, hammer technique, I was made to make it work. And the main idea of the SDK is that DJI provide an SDK, and you can build your custom application on top of the SDK. So the idea of SDK as an attack vector was isolate some specific instruction sent to the drone while sniffing, the traffic. And I would like to implement a custom application that could send some specific payloads to the drone, like, for example, the disconnecting from the actual Wi-Fi and connecting to another network in order to get, a full drone takeover. But also, again, SDK has an unlock mechanism, so it's required to have a DJI account and request an API token from the server. And fortunately, in the version that is not the latest, was one of the precedent one, it was enough to patch the Java bytecode, adding basically the SDK level variable to 2. That means that we perform the API token request and the server accepts our request, and this SDK is now unlocked. So without you having a real SDK account, I was able to use it. And this is the communication flow between application and drone. I have filtered out all the UDP traffic, because UDP traffic is used for video feedback between application and drone. And DJI use a custom TCP-based protocol for flight control. So I started some reverse engineering of the protocol, but fortunately, this protocol is also very similar to the one that is used by previous model of Phantom series. So some of the fields were already being identified by the community. And this is the structure of the DJI packet. We have an header of 4 bytes and a payload that is of variable length. And the header is formed for 4 bytes. The first byte is a magical number, magical protocol number, so it's always the same. And after that, we have the packet length, so we have header plus payloads. And the third byte is the version that we are using of the SDK. And the last byte of the header is a custom DJI checksum that I was able to derive from some hard-coded values that are present into the SDK. And after that, we have the payload structure. So we have the first byte that is telling us the source of the packet, in this case the application, that is speaking with the remote controller. After that, we have a sequence number that is an incremental number of the packets, and a flag that, honestly, I don't know for which is being used. It's changing depending on the packets, but I wasn't able to figure it out. And after that, we have the command. In this case, it's set remote controller, I think, and another ID that is, again, incremental. And after that, we have some optional bytes that are holding the real meaning of the packet. So if in this case we are setting something on the remote controller, the optional byte will hold the settings for the value that we are editing. Okay, last attack vector for the drone, GPS. And GPS was the main attack vector and the attack vector on which I focus mostly. And mainly because it is completely remote, it doesn't have the prerequisite of having one of attacker device inside the network of the drone. So, and it's also the most common way to hijack a civil drone, since civil GPS signal is not encrypted. And speaking about GPS attack, the most common way is to perform the replay attack. So we are replying our previously recorded signal. And as a setup, I used as a software the GPS SDR SIM. That is a nice software. It can generate some GPS signal. And as an hardware, I choose the HRF one. It's a great piece of hardware, and it's also kind of cheap if we compare to other devices, because it's 300 euro, but there are other SDR that are a lot more expensive. So the main problem with HRF is that its internal clock is not precise enough for GPS replying. So I needed to buy an external clock that is a really small electronic component that you basically had to put on top of the HRF in order to get a precise clock for GPS attack. Problem with this external clock is that you need to have it shipped from China, so it would take 1 month, before it arrived. And before we will able to generate our GPS signal, we need to gather some basic data that are called ephemeris data. And these data are containing information about the current and future location of a satellite. And ephemeris data can be gathered from NASA website. They can be freely accessed. And usually you have to download a new ephemeris data every 24 hours, even if ephemeris data are considered good enough until 30 days. The first time that I tried to perform GPS attack, I was using a really old ephemeris data, and I wasn't able to spoof GPS signals. So I would recommend, if you have to try, to download the last ephemeris data, because I lost the entire morning trying to understand why it wasn't working. So, and this is the result of a GPS spoofing attack. The device now thinks that I'm in Turkey, while of course I'm not. Another thing that I would like to point out, the time information is one that is contained inside the spoofed signal, so we can spoof space and time. Keep that in mind, because we will need it later. So the drone was in Italy, but I was spoofing the location of the White House, that is surprisingly a no-fly zone. So if I try to fly, I got this error message. And funny things, DJI thinks that the no-fly zone of White House is because it's a nuclear power plant, so maybe they know something that we don't. And if we spoof no-fly zone, where there isn't, the drone cannot take off. But if the drone is inside a no-fly zone and we spoof a fake position, so another zone that is not a no-fly zone, the drone will be unlocked and will be able to fly. So we can counter no-fly zone with GPS spoofing, or we can counter drone setting up on-demand no-fly zone. And this is what happens if the drone is flying and we fake a no-fly zone. The drone is forced to land. I would like to bring a live demo, but person and flying drone in the same area is not the best thing. So that's why I'm using the video. And keep also in mind that with my hardware setup or software setup, both of them, this attack would take something like 10 to 15 minutes. Probably using some better hardware equipment or some optimized software will be easier to perform this attack. And this is the schema that can be used with the right hardware equipment to perform the complete takeover. So the real drone is on the green marker, and at that point, two different attacks are performed against the drone. The first one will be an authentication attack for the main controller, so it will trigger the return to home functionality. And at the same time, we will also perform GPS spoofing attack. So now drone thinks to be on the red marker, and it will try to fly home, while in reality, it will fly on the opposite direction in another location. So we can basically capture or shut down the drone. And this is basically the concept behind GPS spoofing attack. But we have to combine two different attacks, the authentication attack and GPS spoofing. So how we can notice GPS attack? As far as I was able to understand, with my setup, we can basically validate GPS packet subframe. Real GPS packets, as you can see from the image, subframe set with real data, while with my setup, the subframe is all set to 0. So if from the device we can check this subframe, we can discard all the GPS packets that has all 0 subframe. And another things, we can try to validate the time that we are getting from the GPS signal with the time that we have set on device. So if the two times are too much different, we should refuse, for example, a GPS signal that we are receiving. And the last and third option that we have is to check the time spent traveling between two different GPS positions. So if we are in Italy and after 1 second the new GPS position is China, we should refuse the GPS signal that we are receiving because it's impossible. Okay, third and pretty much last block, DJI drone forensics. So with the increasing number of drone incidents, I thought that it can be interesting to understand and know where we can retrieve data from a specific model. And in this case, data are in 3 main locations. The camera that is mounted on the gimbal, from which we can retrieve media files. And the TXT file that are present on mobile phone that is holding the mobile application of DJI. And third and last location are .dat file that are present in a memory that is, again, is not documented, but if you disassemble the drone, you will be able to discover this memory. And this memory is present on the motherboard of the drone and is the real aircraft black box or flight recorder. So we have these 3 main locations. Speaking about that file present on the black box, they are proprietary DJI file, and the structure of the file, as you can see from the image, is really resemble the packet structure for SDK. So again, we have the first byte that is a magic number, always 55 hexadecimal value, and after that we have again who's speaking, the sensor, and again other indication. Basically, I didn't spend a lot of time trying to understand this that file because there is an already available tool that is called DROP, Drone Open Source Parser, which you will be able to find the reference in the slides. And it will be able to parse this DAT file and retrieve a more easily readable format for you. So I then spent some time for other stuff. For example, what happens if the data on the black box, what happens if the black box is full of data? So all this data is overwritten, but not only by deleting file pointers. Basically, they zeroed out the space of this older file, and that will reduce the chance of forensic recovery. And it's also possible, and I was a bit astonished and upset when I discovered it, it's also possible to fly the drone without this memory, without the black box. So this can be used as an anti-forensic technique, because if we remove the main memory, the last location is the mobile phone that is optional, so we are not required to use mobile phone, and files on the gimbal and files on the camera are only for media files, so they are not so useful. So these are all the data that we can extract from both that file and TXT file. But especially I'm focusing on that file because they are on the main aircraft body. So what can we do if we aggregate all this information? Well, for example, we can show the drone fly path, and we can also show some statistics related to maximum altitude and speed, distance, and so on. And we can also reconstruct the entire sensor signal through the fly path. So in this specific example, I'm showing you the event of a signal lost, but we can recover a list of all the occurred events in a given time frame. And for every event, we can also recover the altitude of the drone and the distance from the home point. So if we intersect all data, basically gimbal data, flight data, and the events in which photos or video are taken, we can also reconstruct this kind of map that can show us what the operator was able to see and photograph. So we can be better than CSA. And now, if the DAT file remains stored only on the memory of the drone and they are not shared, different approach is for TXT file. TXT file on mobile phone are used to feed the statistic of DJI pilot account, so they are uploaded entirely on DJI server. And they will use to show a small recap of your flights online. And with all this data shared to Chinese servers, it's not hard to understand why US Army banned DJI products in the summer 2017. Also, these are all the permissions that you have to share with basically DJI in order, for the GPS location only, in order to have all the functionality. Because if you're not allowed all these different GPS settings, basically you will lose the access to some functionality. So you can only use some really base flight for your drone. Okay, some minor things that I have not previously said. The video feedback on the drone has no type of checksum, so we can potentially spoof the video feedback and show any type of image on the operator screen. Another things, the drone is really sensitive to electromagnetic fields, and it has a compass system that requires calibration before the first flight. And I can tell you from experience that if you try to, for example, turn on the drone next to a big mass of metal, the compass will go crazy and it will require calibration. Okay, since I think I still have 2 minutes. These are some of the drone countermeasures that have been created to defend against drone. And even if these countermeasures are not effective in case of huge swarms of drones or very, very tiny and miniaturized drone. So this is an example of drone netting. Is a drone that is shooting a net to neutralize another drone. And after that, they started to training eagles in order to take down drones. But yeah, confetti gun can also be effective, or yeah, jet ski. And now you can imagine the pain of drone operators, since the drone in the image is costing like 4,000 euro. And this is what happened in reality. They shoot down drone with $3 million miss. Okay, so yeah, further works. Things that I left out. So I can maybe try to reverse engineering and decompile all the custom binary that are present on this modified version of OpenWrt in order to find some, cool exploit and maybe something that can be exploited inside the same network of the drone. Or maybe I can play with something that is more complex next time. So maybe fourth model of DJI or the upcoming new ones. Okay, some reference and useful links that you will be able to find in the slides. And with this, I end my talk. So if there are any questions.
Is there any way that a DOS attack can be used for the drones?
Sorry?
You were mentioning the network protocols.
Yeah.
So is there a way that a DOS attack can be used, like denial of service for the drones? Does it make any effect on this?
Well, honestly, I didn't try the denial of service attack on the drone. But yeah, I mean, it can be something that can be performed. But again, you need to have a device inside the network of the drone. So it's not that easy unless they left the default password on the drone.
Yeah, like because if we consider like a defense mechanism against the drones, instead of using like that 300 million equipment, maybe we can have some protocol fuzzer or a denial of service machine, which would be quite easier and it would not be any mechanical thing.
No,
it's just a radio.
Yeah, but you still need to connect this device to the network.
But okay.
So,
thank you.
No problem.
Anybody else? No. In that case, thank you very much, Paolo.
Thank you.